What are the symptoms of chronic stress?
Core symptoms of chronic stress that we typically look for first are...
Dr. David Rabin, psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and founder of Apollo Neuro, is a leading expert in psychedelic medicine and the mind-body connection revolutionizing mental health treatment.
The major flaw of mental health and our approach to mental health today is that we still look at it as if the mind and the body are separate. Living a long, healthy life is much, much more likely if you have high heart rate variability and high vagus nerve activity.
Where do you draw the line of somebody who needs actually professional help or somebody who just needs to take a breath and move on with life because that's how life is?
Even the people who really need help.
Dave Rabin, thank you for joining us. We'll get this rolling. What do you think is fundamentally broken in the way that we address mental health today?
That's a great question, and thank you so much for having me. I think I would say the major flaw of mental health and our approach to mental health today is that we still look at it as if the mind and the body are separate. And the neuroscience to date, all of it together, really demonstrates that the opposite is true, which is that the mind and the body are intimately and irreversibly interconnected. And when we start to understand that the mind and the body are connected, in fact, we understand then that when we are not feeling physically well and we don't do anything about it, we can become, and often do become, mentally and emotionally unwell. And if we are mentally stressed or emotionally stressed and we don't do anything about it, we can become physically unwell and manifest physical symptoms in our bodies. And so and stress makes symptoms of almost every illness worse. So when you kind of take that into account, it really helps us to understand that if we look at the mind and the body as being connected, then we can understand how stress in the mental, emotional side of our lives can actually cause physical symptoms, and vice versa, how physical symptoms can cause mental and emotional stress and mental and emotional issues as well, mental health issues. And that really helps us to understand how to treat mental illness in a more effective manner.
How would you define stress?
So stress is really just challenge on the body. So challenge on the body can come from any number of different things. It can come from too much sunlight, in which case the stress of too much sunlight can cause a sunburn on the skin, right? So that would be skin stress. It can also come from too many responsibilities, too much stimulation, too much news, which causes emotional overload, what you call like allostatic load. So your too much overstimulation on the body causes the stress response system, which is the body's fight or flight survival system, to get turned on when it's not supposed to be turned on. And that system is really the fight or flight system, which we call the sympathetic nervous system, that responds to stress, is really designed to respond to survival threat. So threats that would impact our future survival, like lack of food, lack of water, lack of air, lack of shelter, predators chasing us in the jungle, lack of acceptance by our community, those kinds of things trigger that fight or flight response, and are evolved to in all animals, pretty much all mammals, for over 100 million years. So that kind of stress is designed to trigger our stress response to get us into safety. Once we're safe, then we can reevaluate stress as, well, is this a survival threat, or is this something that's just challenging me to grow and become better? And so we really kind of divide stress up into two categories, one of which is the survival threat stress, the stress that makes us think we're going to die, the overwhelming stress, and that's called distress, which is what causes disease.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's eustress, EU stress, in Latin, EU means good, and good stress is stress that challenges us to grow and become better, stronger, faster versions of ourselves. And stress, too much stress of any kind, can become distress, and changing our perspective on stress can transmute distress into eustress. So there's a lot of techniques that we use in the human performance and mental health world that actually help us to manage stress more effectively, because there's a lot that we can do that we're just not taught very often in our day-to-day.
Two follow-up questions here. Number one is, you said that there's a fight flight. So I went to the cave, I'm in safety, And then my brain realized it was a good stress or a bad stress. In the moment of the stress, all stresses are the same initially. Did I understand it correctly?
No, I mean, in the moment of stress, we have the ability to recognize something as survival threat or not in the moment
Instantly.
immediately.
Okay, understood.
When our bodies are overstimulated, when we're like overwhelmed and overstimulated, like in most days of modern society, when we get exposed to stress, our amygdala, the fear center that governs the primary fear and safety responses in our brains, that fires off more sensitively. So it's more likely to send a fear signal saying you're under threat when your body is already overwhelmed and stressed out from too much going on, too much news, too much anything. So in most of us today, the reason why we're kind of in an epidemic of chronic stress and mental health challenges in modern society, in large part, is because we have too much incoming information. We're too overwhelmed too much of the time. So little things that don't actually cause us threat, like a funny look from somebody across the room, or an email in a so-so tone, right? Like these kinds of things, or somebody pinging you at the wrong time, like those kinds of things can set off a dramatic reaction where they normally wouldn't if we felt safe and calm. And so when stress comes in, at any point along its observation and experiencing of it and processing path, we can recognize it as safety, as we're safe to experience this. We're not under threat, or we can just think about it as a threat. But if we think about it as a threat, then it changes the nature of it. And so the quicker that we train ourselves to be resilient, so getting to the outcome being training vagus nerve activity, which is the parasympathetic nervous system that counteracts the stress response system, and we train it with mindfulness, yoga, meditation, breathing, physical exercise, sauna, cold plunge, like all these different resilience training techniques, and you measure it with HRV, the more you train your nervous system to bounce back quickly, the more quickly we can recognize we can recognize stress as actually threatening, or just something that is making us think it's threatening, but it's not, and that we're safe. And as soon as we remind ourselves we're safe, we step into our optimal performance window. If we're under threat, we do not function in an optimal performance window. We function as like a tunnel vision, get me out of here, type of moment.
So before we move on, because you started already with all the techniques and what we can do, I think it's also important so we established the baseline what stress is. I think you're fully right. I think the shift that the mind-body connection, everybody understands how the mind directly impacts the body. And there's also the stigma is shifting from, it used to be like, let's not talk about mental well-being, especially as a guy. You need to always be stress resilient. You always has to be on the top. But then you have the shift where everybody's becoming mentally unwell and mentally unstable, and everything's becoming so triggering to them. What's the baseline where it's like, hey, you need help, or hey, you need to start doing techniques, and hey, no, this is just regular life. This is nothing abnormal. Like when somebody comes see you, where do you draw the line of somebody who needs actually professional help, or somebody who just needs to take a breath and move on with life because that's how life is?
Yeah. It's a funny and interesting question, because even the people who really need help most of the time just need to stop and take a breath to start the process, and that's like, those same techniques are essential for everyone to do. They're like the simple, slow breathing techniques are where we start with every patient. And then if that doesn't work and people are doing the therapy and they're doing the breath work and the mindfulness techniques and all of the work that we teach them, and they're still not getting results, then we start thinking about, well, maybe this is an opportunity for medicine like ketamine assisted therapy, or maybe this is an opportunity for integrating different supplements that help boost resilience, or wearable technology like Apollo, or even traditional antidepressant medications have their role in folks who don't respond to therapy and the natural techniques. But I think it's really about how long have you tried doing stuff, right, differently. And when people have really put a solid effort into trying to do things differently, and it's not like months of time, and it's not working, or their symptoms are so intense and so overwhelming that they feel so bad that they can't even get to trying to take a breath or do some mindfulness practices or change their routine. That's when we start thinking about higher levels of care and medication, augmented treatment programs, and things like that.
How do you tell if somebody
But actually, yeah.
how do you tell if somebody's actually like really stressed out? Because there'll be some people who are probably more on the sensitive side who are like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. Like there'll just be pure negativity coming out of them. Where there's other people who they seem to just kind of brush it off and just power on. But if you actually looked at them and maybe checked their blood work, you'd probably see, oh wow, okay, this person's really stressed out. So what are the symptoms of chronic stress?
I mean, the core symptoms of chronic stress that we typically look for first are poor sleep. So that's a big one. High resting heart rate, low heart rate variability, and high blood pressure, frequent occurrence of like racing thoughts, restlessness in your body, like physical restlessness where you feel like you have to move all the time, and irritability, poor focus, right? These kinds of things that are kind of like precursors to early precursors of burnout that we see often, where they just kind of, people don't do anything about, they start to have these symptoms, but they don't do anything about it. And then over time, they think it's normal and they're trying to deal with it on their own. Then over time, the source of the stress that's causing people to feel poor focus and low motivation and low energy and poor sleep and irritability and all these things, the source of the problem doesn't get solved because everybody's minimizing it and thinking, oh, well, this is just normal. And maybe there's something wrong with me that I'm feeling this, but there's not something wrong with most people. It's that we are not, as humans, designed for the level of stress that modernity has put on us. Like and by stress, I mean incoming information, right? So like just kind of looking at stress is not good or bad. It's just amount of incoming information. So to give you an idea, the amount of incoming information that we take in the 21st century in the first 30 minutes of being awake, when we pick up our phones in that first 30 minutes, is as much information as the average human being took in 1 week of being alive in the 1950s.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right? It's a humongous amount of information, like thousands or tens of thousands more data points every day than we used to take in the 1950s in a week. So that's just a huge amount of load on the body. And yet we weren't taught the techniques to filter all of that incoming information out to really understand like what is important and what is not important for me to focus on, because I can't focus on all of it. There's just too much. And so this is really where I think, to answer your question, some people are able to just fly through stress and overcome it and see it as a growth opportunity and just be like, hey, this is just the next thing on my plate. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to be better and stronger after I get through this. So I'm not going to think about what's wrong with me that I have to deal with this issue right now. I'm just going to deal with the challenge. I'm going to figure out how to get over it, and I'm going to move on and take those lessons forward. And people who have that kind of attitude, which often comes from a lot of stress, discomfort, what we call like discomfort tolerance training or hormesis training, which can come from your upbringing as a child, or can come from, again, doing like intense sporting activities, sauna, cold plunge, physical exercise and pursuits, mental discipline techniques, and things like that can train you to do that. Medical school, the military, these are all different training techniques to help build resilience in that way. And people who have those training tools tend to have an easier time just moving through stress without it holding us back and keeping us stuck. So, but if you add enough stress, it will eventually take a toll on somebody's body, and you can measure it in those different ways.
A quick one, because you dropped the word burnout. Given that the audience that we have is probably 35, 40, probably the peak of their professional career, corporate career. I was once explained the burnout, the difference between burnout and you just being stressed is, if you have a burnout on a Friday evening when you watch movies, you can't enjoy the movie and you can't smile and you can't be positive. If you're stressed at work, but then in the evening, if you spend time with your family, you can still be happy. Would you say, is that something accurate? Is that how you can describe a burnout?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. I mean, I think it's more like the stress from work. If you're just stressed out a lot with work, when you get home to do anything else and then you reset for the day, you can go back to work again and still feel fresh the next day and
Yeah.
feel like excited and passionate and motivated to do what you're going to do. Once people hit burnout because of too much accumulated chronic stress over time and they really like check that burnout box, then the passion is gone, right? The motivation is gone,
And they
the
can't
excitement is gone.
and they can't get excited about other things outside of work either.
And it can extend to other things outside of work too. It's especially for work though. It's like, I think that's really the main thing. The lack of passion and excitement can spread into other areas too,
Okay.
which is something we want to avoid, which is why we really try to address this early and help people prevent burnout before it happens. Once it happens, people can often need many months of vacation to recover before they go back to their previous lives.
So you touched on the vagus nerve, and I think a lot of us, me, myself, from my perspective, go through our lives not thinking too much about it. But the literature and from a data perspective, it's so impactful on our health and our well-being. Can you maybe explain to the people more in detail what it is, what it does, and how you can impact it in daily life?
Sure. So the vagus nerve is arguably one of the single most important nerves in our bodies. There are lots of important nerves in our bodies, but the vagus nerve is important because it is the nerve that carries the signals from our brain when our brain is responding to safety, that tells our body to turn on recovery and to start slowing things down. So to recoup energy, to digest our food, absorb our food, it tells our body to activate the reproductive system when we're safe enough to reproduce, to sleep, to rest, to enter deep sleep stages, to fight off illness. All of those things come from vagus nerve activity and are managed by the vagus nerve. And it's a cranial nerve, so it starts in the brain, goes to the brainstem, and comes out of the brainstem and innervates literally our entire bodies. So it's a very, very important one. And this is really interesting because actually from your field in before medicine, in the elite athletics world, conditioning coaches have been trying to figure out how to predict peak performance, consistent peak performance from their best athletes for a very long time. And particularly in high anaerobic sports. So sports like wrestling, ice hockey, and where you have to put in a ton of like burst effort. And coaches wanted to know, if you are typically a starter, why would you not perform well on one day versus another day?
Yeah.
And because you're typically performing at a very high level consistently all the time, but then certain days you're just not. And they want to know how to predict when you're gonna choke, basically, so they can put somebody else in instead. And the military also cares about this for their missions, very dangerous missions. So what they started doing is they started testing heart rate variability, which is the rate of change of our heartbeat over time, which is a very simple measure of vagus nerve activity. And as you increase vagus nerve activity, which slows the body down, your heart rate comes down. So that's one of the best ways to understand how much vagus nerve activity you have, is based on how low your resting heart rate is. And the more trained your vagus nerve is, the more toned your vagus nerve is, the lower your resting heart rate. When your resting heart rate is lower, your heart rate variability, which is the amount of time change between each beat of your heart, goes up. And that is the most reliable metric of now consistent peak performance and fast recovery. And so conditioning coaches in colleges and folks who are, determining who's going to be going into a starting game or a mission in the military were using heart rate variability to predict whether or not a typical starter was ready to start, or if they didn't sleep well the night before, they had a fight with their partner or spouse, or they were just, not feeling in the top of their game. Our HRV could predict it. So if their HRV was like 10 or 20 or 30% lower than their baseline and they're about to start, then they're going to perform 10, 20, or 30% roughly worse than they would normally, because their body is not recovered and their vagus nerve tone is lower. So that is really the power of this metric. And it's the best now predictor of longevity. So living a long, healthy life is much, much more likely if you have high heart rate variability and high vagus nerve activity. And that study just came out in the last 2 years, and it's very, very interesting.
What would you say right now are the best devices out there on the market that can accurately track HRV? Because I know there's a lot of things, that you have the Oura Ring, you got Whoop, I know there's Apple Watch, there's all these devices now that are measuring your heartbeat and calculating it. Is that going to give you a fairly accurate HRV score, or are they kind of just take them with a pinch of salt?
So you have to know how to look at the data. It's not that any one of them, some of them are not good. The best ones I would say are Apple Watch and Oura Ring for actually tracking heart rate variability, but you have to understand what you're looking at. And these devices, the thing about heart rate variability is it changes in every moment of the day. It changes with every breath, it changes with every movement, it changes when you're standing up, when you're sitting down, when you're working out, when you're sleeping. And so you have to track HRV over time, and you have to measure your average heart rate variability, which is what your middle of the road average is for the whole day. But what really matters is when you start to look at your max heart rate variability at night, which is the what is the maximum level that your heart rate variability gets to when you're sleeping? And you want to look at that week over week. Day over day with the wearables is so because again, your heart rate variability is changing every time you do anything. And so you have to be looking at it with a daily resolution has a margin of error that's probably about in the 10 to 15% range, which means that it's 10 to 15% off on average on a daily basis. But on a weekly basis, it's actually quite accurate. And so you can start to track your health, and you can understand, for instance, with an Apple Watch and Oura Ring, if you track your HRV over time, you can understand if your HRV is 20% lower on to like Monday of this week, then you might be likely to get sick that week, more likely. And so if you push yourself, so don't push yourself that week, try to get a little more rest, take a few more naps, try to get a little more sleep at night, and just take it a little more easy. And then you'll start to see your HRV come back up. And that means you're ready to go and push yourself again. So you can kind of use it as guidance for that. And also for helping us understand when somebody might relapse into addiction or mental illness. When people's heart rate variability is lower, their chances of relapse is higher. And there's a lot of other ways that you can use it. And that's actually why we developed Apollo, because Apollo works like other vagal nerve techniques to boost heart rate variability as a measure of improvement in mental health and physical health and performance. So there's lots of techniques that also boost HRV, Apollo being one of them, and you can track the outcomes from doing those techniques like deep breathing, mindfulness meditation, etc.
So yeah, when we talk about, again, if we know that's so important for longevity, and then number one question everybody in the audience is going to have, how can I improve it? So you're talking about Apollo, so it's a vibration therapy. Can you deep dive a little bit into that, how it works? Because as a user, you're always a little bit skeptical how something, quote unquote, simple, like vibration, has such an immense impact. And how did you find about it?
Sure. Well, so I mentioned I'm a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist, and I work with folks who are both elite military veterans and people who have a very high level of physical fitness training, and elite athletes and severely afflicted mental health patients, everything in between. And what's really interesting is that almost all of these folks in the literature have been found to have low heart rate variability. And they also respond, especially when they have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And when their heart rate variability is low, they respond to treatment very poorly as a theme.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so as I started to see these relationships between heart rate variability, vagus nerve activity, and their treatment responses, we thought, well, there are treatments that work. And some of the treatments that work are biofeedback, which boosts heart rate variability, breathing techniques, yoga, soothing touch. Have you ever had an experience, either of you, where you're having a bad day and you walk into a room or your car and your favorite song or one of your favorite songs randomly comes on and you almost instantly feel better?
Yes, absolutely.
So that is a universal human experience, and it happens when you get a hug on a bad day from somebody you like as well. And we have all had this experience, but it was very poorly understood by neuroscience until the last 20 or 30 years, where we realized that when we have these powerful experiences where there's an almost instant transition between feeling bad and then feeling good, it's because our vagus nerve is activated by something in our environment that makes us feel safe. Music can do it. Touch can do it. Smelling one of your favorite foods that your parents is making can do it. Tasting delicious food can do it. All these soothing sensory experiences do it. And so we thought, well, what if technology can help do it for us without requiring somebody else to do something for you? What if you could just have a wearable deliver one of these soothing vibrations to you through your touch receptor system, so you don't have to use your ears, and then it can give you a little boost of vagus nerve activity on the go. And we started testing that because the evidence was there for probably about 50 or 60 years before we started doing this work. There was a lot of evidence that this was possible, but nobody had done it using sound waves. So we went back and said, okay, well, all vagus nerve stimulators to date that do work are electricity. They have side effects. They take 20 to 40 minutes a day to use them. So you have to take time out of your day to use them. And they don't solve everybody's problem. They require a lot of effort. And so what if we use sound waves to make this something that the average person could just use anytime they want? And so we just started experimenting with it. And then eventually, after testing it on ourselves and our friends, family, colleagues, people really liked it. We eventually discovered two vibes, which are now the focus vibe and the calm vibe, that people really, really liked, like universally liked. And so when we ran some double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled crossover studies at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in healthy subjects, which is the most rigorous form of clinical trial, and showed that unequivocally only these specific Apollo vibrations boost heart rate variability in as little as 2 to 3 minutes under stress. And nothing else really does that. So that was really interesting. And then we started exploring this and prototyped it and ran, I'm going to say, like 14 more clinical studies, over 2,000 subjects in the last 5-7 years. And they all started showing consistent results around sleep, cognitive performance, physical performance enhancement, recovery, and actually starting to address some challenging issues that people have with different mental and physical illnesses. And then from there, we just brought it to market in 2020, and now it's available on iPhone for free to try. So anybody who has an iPhone who wants to experience the scientifically backed vibrations we're talking about, from my research, you can just download the Apollo Neuro app on your iPhone and try it for free.
I did it. I think there's two of them. One is the hug. There's a sound.
Yeah.
So I did the hug
Yeah,
one.
hug and good vibes.
Good vibes. Yeah. So the question is, as a person, so from I don't know, on a atomic level, is a touch and the sound and the vibration the same for my nervous system? Do they all have the same result, or do people respond differently depending on what their preference is?
So biologically,
yeah,
and physiologically, so what's actually happening in our bodies is the same.
It's the same. That's what I thought. Yeah.
What's different is how we're getting there. So when you listen to soothing music that you like, the vibrations of sound are higher frequency, so they're too high for our skin. They enter instead through the ears, and then through our ears, they vibrate the auricular bones and the eardrum. The eardrum vibrates the bones vibrate the nerve fibers in the cochlea, and then that turns the vibrations of sound waves into neural signals that fire into the temporal cortex of the brain, where we interpret what we hear, and then also into the insular cortex, where we interpret the emotion component of what we hear. And so touch activates the same parts of the brain where we detect things that emotionally feel good or that feel safe, but it does it through the skin. And so it's still sound waves applied to the body, but instead of going to the ears, they're like subwoofer level sound. And so deep bass, we actually feel better through our touch receptors. They're more sensitive to deep bass. That's why live music feels so good, is because we feel the bass through our bodies, not just through our ears. And you don't get that with headphones. So the base vibrates our touch receptors, and the touch receptors go through the spinal cord and send a signal that says, oh, this feels soothing to me. This feels nice. You must be safe enough to feel this if you're able to feel it right now. And so that signal goes up and then signals to the somatosensory cortex that detects soothing touch. And then it signals the insulet cortex, the same cortex that your soothing auditory experiences and tastes and smells activate, that says, this is an emotionally soothing memory, and invokes emotionally soothing memories from the past where you felt good being touched. And then it starts that pathway. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now I know what I like about live music.
Yeah, I feel like I've experienced that. You know, when you're there and you're in the moment and the sound system is the best it could possibly be, you'll Shazam the song.
Yeah.
You're like, this sounds amazing. I feel good. And then you go back home, or the next day you listen to it through like normal earphones. You're like, this is not as good as I remember it being.
Yeah, exactly. Why do I Shazam that one?
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating.
The vagus nerve, when you discussed it, a couple of things that you said there was, one of them was from fertility perspective, reproduction, that it sends the body has to feel safe to reproduce. Is that one of the reasons why fertility right now is down, because people feel unsafe? Is that one of the reasons? Can maybe, because I think that's a topic that a lot of, especially 30, 40-year-olds right now are looking into, is like, hey, I wanted to wait, now I waited, and now it's not happening as easily as I thought it should be happening. What's the correlation there, or causation in that case?
Yes, it's a great question. So anxiety is actually, if you're not in mental health space, we often don't talk about this and educate about it properly, but anxiety and stress, chronic stress, are the biggest reasons why both men and women have infertility issues or fertility issues. It's stress. At least 50% of the time, it's stress related. And so we're very careful with patients when we hear that there's fertility issues. We often will not recommend them to go for hormone therapy or some kind of invasive treatment first, because there's almost always a lot you can do in the mental health space with just talk therapy to help people feel safe and explore the space between people, to help them feel safe enough to be intimate and to be like calmly, comfortably intimate together. That solves most fertility issues once you do that work. So there's lots of techniques for that, but stress, I mean, if you think about it, like, think about how we evolved, right? Think about, like, Eric Kandel won the Nobel Prize in 2000 for showing that our fear and safety nervous system is this, and the way we learn about fear and safety is the same as every single animal going back like 300 million years to ancient sea snails. And that includes every mammal. So if you think about that and take yourself back into the jungle like 100 million years ago as an ancient human, right? The earliest humans, before there was any infrastructure of current human life, if there was a potential threat around you, like any kind of uncertainty or newness in your space, would you want your body to be diverting resources to reproduction in that moment, or sleep?
Absolutely.
Probably not, right? Like, that's how you die. That's how your line ends, evolutionarily speaking. So the body has these highly hardwired, highly conserved nervous system pathways that shut down reproduction almost first. As soon as any kind of stress comes into play that signals threat, it shuts down reproduction almost immediately. Any kind of sexiness, intimacy, any kind of sleep, ability to get deep sleep, REM sleep, are most restorative, important sleep phases. The immune system gets shut down pretty quickly. That's why when we're stressed for a long period of time, we're much more likely to get sick. We've all had that experience, working too hard and getting sick. So I think that's how to think about it. And if we understand that the nervous system is literally hardwired to shut down everything that's not required for survival when we're under stress, then it helps us to understand that we just need more safety in our lives and constantly to remind ourselves that we are safe by doing soothing things that will help to solve most of our day-to-day problems, including fertility. So it's a really, like, it's a lot simpler than it sounds. And I think that's the good news. The good news is neuroscience is actually showing that making like pleasure is good, joyfulness is good, doing things that soothe our bodies and make ourselves feel good is actually really healthy. Having sex as a man at least once a week, I think, was shown in a recent study to decrease all-cause mortality by something like 50%. Like, think about that, right? Pleasure, whether you're pleasuring yourself
Makes
without
sense.
regret or with somebody else, decreases all-cause mortality in men by 50%. Like, that is insane, but it just also shows that everything we understand about pleasure and the biological impact of pleasure is that it's healing. So we should be doing it more often.
Does the stress affect the lead up to and performance of sex itself, or is it the actual, once it's happened?
Conception, yeah.
Yeah. Was it both?
Sorry, it's all of it.
Okay.
So it's especially in women. I would say some people have coped in different ways where stress can become a turn on, and that's an adaptation that we as humans are uniquely able to achieve. A lot of animals are not able to function in that way. But in general, when we are under stress, chronic stress, that's like what we would call distress, stress that makes us feel upset, uncomfortable, overwhelmed, that is shutting down the reproductive system. And it's not just shutting it down in the phase of trying to actually like fertilize an egg and make a baby. It shuts down desire, right? It shuts down like our prioritization of time to even be intimate. It shuts down setting like the parts of us that create the space for romantic intimacy. It shuts down lubrication. It shuts down like erection. It shuts down all of it. So, and it shuts down menstruation. Like chronic stress will actually shut down ovulation in women. So with women, we are also like, we're always actually even more careful than with men in terms of how we manage stress, because we can manage it by also helping using objective markers like menstruation timing and frequency and premenstrual symptoms and that kind of thing as an indicator that a woman's body is healthy, both nutritionally and on a stress level, because stress has a major impact in menstruation frequency.
So just to summarize, just for the audience, so healing happens in safety. We can probably add reproduction happens in safety. If you have a hard time conceiving, before moving on to hormone therapy, 50% of it is probably on a mental level that can be solved by lowering stress levels. But now comes the interesting part that I heard you said prior, was that actually stress can be stored in our genes and can impact telomere length. So it's something that can be passed on in generations. Is that the case? So is that something that if I had stress in the past before I conceived, or is it if I was under stress while the reproduction part was happening? What part impacts that, and how is it being passed on?
So there's certain stresses that we have experienced in our lives that, again, if we're splitting stress into two categories. So one of them is stress that helps us to grow and feel stronger, better, faster versions of ourselves and get closer to recognizing our full potential. We call eustress. Then there's distress, which makes us sick, right? That's the constant, chronic, overwhelming, uncomfortable stress. So both of those experiences, eustress and distress, are changing the way that our neurons in our brains, as one example, are talking to each other, because each one of those experiences, whether it's a stress that causes us to grow, whether it's a stress that causes us suffering and pain, is teaching us something about the world. It's a experience we're having, and every time we have an experience, that experience gets recorded between different neurons in our brains. And so you following me?
Yes.
With the neural connections. So experience in our world is represented by neural connections being formed. When we have that neural connection formed, those parts of the brain that are connecting with each other have to build scaffolding to connect. So every cell, like if this is a neuron 1 and this is neuron 2, right now they're disconnected. But for neuron 1 to talk to neuron 2, because I just had an experience that brings them together, like I had an ice cream on a bad day and I now associate ice cream with feeling great. So here's ice cream, here's a bad day. I bring them together. Ice cream makes me feel good. Now the ice cream neurons connect to my 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 neurons around feeling better. So now I have established a connection, and that connection can be nourished and grow. But it has to. This cell that represents ice cream, this neuron, has to make scaffolding that makes the dendrites or the attachments, neuroattachments, grow out to talk to this neuron. There's a neuronal growth happening. That's what we call neuroplasticity. That's what happens when we form new memories. So for that to happen, there has to be what's called epigenetic change. Epigenetics are this series of code that sits on top of our DNA. Mm-hmm. The DNA is the same in every cell, but except sperm and egg, but epigenetic code tells our DNA to turn up or down certain proteins, including neuronal growth proteins and scaffolding proteins and stress response proteins. So what a number of famous scientists, including Dr. Rachel Yehuda, discovered many years ago is that when we experience severe trauma as human beings, severe trauma meaning we start to meet diagnostic criteria for something like PTSD, our cortisol epigenetic code on the cortisol receptor genes changes to reflect a different functioning of the cortisol receptor that has been caused by the response of the body to trauma. So the person has a severely traumatic event happen, then their body has a change to the code that sits on top of the cortisol receptor DNA, so that when cortisol receptors are made, they're made in a way that is less functional than the regular cortisol receptor that is untraumatized. We'll call it an untraumatized cortisol receptor. So that's how one of the ways that the body stores stress on the epigenetic level. And what's interesting is that Rachel showed early data, and others have shown follow-up data now that's pretty confirmatory that when we experience trauma that causes these changes to cortisol receptor genes, if we don't fix it in our generation before we have kids, we can pass those cortisol receptor changes down to our follow on our children and our children's children for potentially up to 10 generations, at least 4 generations. And so that's not good. But that also helps to explain the understanding or the theory of intergenerational inheritance of trauma or transgenerational inheritance of trauma, so that we can pass down the memory of traumatic events that actually will increase our children's likelihood of developing mental illness if we pass that down. So that's not good news. The good news is that we can fix those epigenetic changes that are caused by trauma. And some of the first data that came out showing that definitively we can fix those like cortisol receptor changes that are from like a traumatized cortisol receptor is from a study we did with MDMA assisted therapy, where we showed that MDMA, which is one of the leading psychedelic medicines that's being developed for trauma treatment, that actually has a clinical response correlate with the amount of epigenetic change. So what that means is that in people who have severe PTSD who receive MDMA assisted therapy, just 3 doses and 42 hours of therapy over 12 weeks, that the more better people get, the more epigenetic remodeling of the cortisol receptor they have. So now you can start to understand that there's a relationship between how much better people get and how their stress response genes are getting their epigenetic memory remodeled. And we're starting to see the same outcomes with other psychedelic medicines as well, and other therapies that don't involve psychedelic medicines, which kind of suggests that there may be a more uniform signature of healing in the body on the epigenetic level that we didn't understand before. But at least we know trauma is reversible on an epigenetic level, and that is really exciting. I mean, that's like breakthrough for the field of psychiatry, where we didn't have a metric like that before.
This is interesting. How did this even come to happen? Something like MDMA or ketamine, which is, I guess, primarily a recreational drug. Who figured out, okay, maybe we can actually use this to treat people? Do you know the backstory to that?
I do. So ketamine in the general population, what you're saying is often the understanding is that most people see these medicines as recreational drugs, but they were actually developed for therapy first. So ketamine was developed about 70 years ago by as a derivative of PCP. It has a very different effect than PCP, which was predominantly a drug of abuse. Ketamine was developed as an anesthetic, what's called a dissociative anesthetic. So it kind of gives you this experience of separating mind and body almost immediately. And it was developed to evacuate wounded soldiers from the battlefield when they were in shock to prevent them from bleeding out. And it's still used for that to this day. And it became one of the most popular gentle surgical anesthetics for children and pregnant women and animals. So it's used primarily in humans today, and has been for about 50 to 70 years as an anesthetic and to save wounded soldiers from the battlefield. It works really, really well for that.
So it disconnects your mind and your body. So
you don't go into shock. So like if you were shot and then you look down and you realize you're bleeding out and then you're like, oh my God, I'm bleeding out. And what happens? Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, and you bleed out and die faster. So now what happens, and what has happened for the last 50 to 70 years, is that you get shot. Ideally, before you even recognize you got shot, a medic has just come up to you and stabbed you in the shoulder or the butt with an intramuscular shot of ketamine. And then within seconds to minutes, you dissociate from the fact that you were just mortally wounded. And your body goes into kind of like a more dormant, like shut down mode. And you don't feel the pain and the shock of what happened. So your body doesn't go into shock. So it buys you like potentially 5 to 10, 15 minutes to get somebody out, where before ketamine, you might have only had like 60 to 120 seconds to get somebody out.
And is that mode...
So that was pretty amazing.
And that mode, is that what's called K-hole around recreational circles?
Yeah, that's the state. Yes, that's the state that they're getting people into. I would say in some ways it might be even like a little beyond a K-hole. Like higher dose than
they're
that.
going beyond the K-hole.
Yeah, sounds scary.
Yeah, that's like which I would call you like an anesthetic dose of ketamine. So like beyond the K-hole, which is what I would call like the meditative therapeutic dose of ketamine, is the anesthetic dose of ketamine, where your sense of self kind of vanishes a little bit, or dissolves a little bit, and you lose you don't have a lot of memory from those experiences. There's a dose dependent relationship between how much ketamine you give people and how much memory they retain from the experience. So when we use ketamine in psychotherapy, we use lower doses because we want them to remember what they're experiencing. And those doses are much lower. So people go into a K-hole state, generally speaking, but the K-hole state is a very like peaceful meditative state they've prepared to enter, because they're with a trusting therapist in a clinical setting. The reason why it's called a K-hole is because recreationally in a party, if you take that much ketamine into your body, then you lose the ability to interact with everyone around you, and it feels like you're trapped in a hole or a cave. In the therapy setting, you want to be in that cave. That cave is where healing lives. So you just don't necessarily want to be doing that kind of healing at a party, right? Yeah. So it's a mismatch of set and setting. So that's kind of the story behind
time.
ketamine.
Time feels very different, doesn't it? Your sense of time.
Yeah,
you can almost feel like you're there for an eternity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually pretty common with all psychedelic medicines, is that they amplify awareness of the present moment and breath in particular. And so when you start to amplify awareness of the present moment by turning off the egoic mind, which is what Rabin, Harris, and others describe as represented by the default mode network, which is like really like the part of our brain that's responsible primarily for our ego and sense of self. It's responsible for protecting us most of the time. When you realize you're safe enough to not have the protector online, the lead protector, all of a sudden you become present in the moment. And when you become present in the moment, you realize the moment is an infinite experience. It's constantly ongoing. It's where all the goodness of life is. So psychedelic medicines have a way of helping accelerate people's ability to get to that present state, which normally, traditionally would take like thousands of hours of meditation to get to.
Can you?
And that's how most of these were discovered. Ketamine was discovered to have mental health benefits in the late 90s, early 2000s. MDMA was discovered to have mental health benefits in the 1960s and 70s. And LSD was discovered to have mental health benefits in the 1940s and 50s. And these have all been studied for many decades at world-renowned universities. Politics gets in the way, unfortunately.
The reason why Mike and I were smiling, I think the producer was so happy because Beyond the K-hole will be the title of this episode. If ketamine decouples your mind and your body, how would you describe what MDMA does then?
So MDMA, we would call, it's like the opposite of ketamine in a lot of ways. It can be used what's interesting is it can be used for similar outcomes with trauma and trauma healing, but it's more like an associative psychedelic. So if ketamine is a dissociative psychedelic, it like separates your mind and your body so that your mind can watch your body and watch what's been stored in your body and kind of reflect on, as a witness, observer, non-judgmentally, what's happened to you, and then integrate that. That's ketamine. MDMA is an associative psychedelic. So I would say it highly integrates mind and body and highly connects mind and body during the experience. You're fully present, you're fully aware, you're fully recognizing the complete connection with your entire self and your intuition, and you're at peace with it.
Are you social?
And
are you more social?
Yeah, usually more social with MDMA and less social, more internal with ketamine.
So okay, you've probably heard that from recreational. Why do people say music sounds better? You probably heard that too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it does sound better with any psychedelic medicine, not just with MDMA. It sounds better with any psychedelic, and it's the same reason why time extends, because it's called time dilation, and time dilation is something you can experience by doing slow, deep breathing exercises that I could walk you through in 15 minutes, and you could experience it for yourself. But that is what makes music sound better, because in large part, when you're dilating time, you're expanding your awareness in the present moment. So you're effectively hearing more of the sound.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if you're more, if normally in an average day, 50% of your attention is thinking about the past, 20% is thinking about the future, that means you only have 30% left to think about right now in the present and to hear the music you're listening to. So all of a sudden you take a psychedelic or you do a deep breathing activity, and now you have 100% of your attention available to listen to the music and to be present. So of course it's going to sound better. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. One thing came to my mind because I'm still stuck on that reproduction, vagus nerve, and the safety. So if I'm a couple, I'm trying to conceive, a hard time doing that, and stress is probably one of the biggest reasons for that. Would then a microdose of MDMA be something to consider to relax to relax myself and to be more open to reproduction? Is that something that people are doing?
So we don't recommend MDMA microdosing because of the chemical pharmacological nature of how MDMA works. It's just not a good candidate for microdosing.
Okay.
It doesn't work unless you hit a certain dose threshold, and so you can't really microdose it well.
Doctor, I didn't expect that answer, doctor.
Yeah.
Stop microdosing.
You can't. Microdosing certain molecules you can do very effectively, like psilocybin and LSD. Tryptamine molecules lend themselves to microdosing well. MDMA and MDMA-like molecules, when you take them solo, just that molecule, MDMA, by itself does not microdose well. It can leave you feeling like kind of anxious, like with jaw tension and restless, but without the euphoria and the very like highly positive feelings that come from the heightened connection of MDMA. So we really recommend that if people are going to take MDMA, they take it, ideally with a guide, and they take it, at a full dose, and you just take one full dose, because then you minimize the risk of overheating and other things that can come from taking too much.
What is a full dose? What's a full dose? And
for the average person, it depends on your weight, but it typically ranges from, if it's pure MDMA, it typically ranges from 80 milligrams to 150 milligrams. And we don't recommend more than that, because that's when you start to get into, overheating, which is usually the main reason why people get sick from MDMA. But I think the ways that people can do, like the simple ways that for fertility that people can use to feel safer, I would say if you're going to integrate psychedelics into that, is to do it with a guide who's comfortable with couples, because that can make a huge difference for people to just reinvite that safety into the relationship, to remember the things about yourself that you really enjoyed in the past, to really help each other feel safe around each other and not judge. Judgment is the major threat to safety, and it's judging ourselves and it's judging each other. And so if we can, and the way to deal with judgment and to process and eliminate judgment from our lives comes from talking about it, and talk therapy more than anything else, and doing your own self-work. So you're not judging yourself and then accidentally judging your partner. So that's the focus, really. And we recommend, we see most people have fertility issues go to talk therapy, and they fix all of it within just talk therapy. Those who didn't respond to talk therapy, we'll often just have them use Apollo. And Apollo with talk therapy for fertility issues works a lot better, because you can wear it before, during, and after intercourse. And it helps men and women access climax more easily. It helps women feel safer in their bodies. It has a lot of benefit that complement therapy, because intimacy responds really well to touch. So having like a touch component, especially for women, is really, really helpful to, making women feel safe in the intimate experience, which most women don't. 70% of women, I think, report that they cannot climax with their partners, and they typically do not climax with their partners. And the reason why is because they don't feel safe with their partners. So if we can help people feel safe, we can dramatically improve our lives. And psychedelics are really, an option for folks who have tried the other stuff. Like, it certainly can be used carefully with a guide, especially, but there's a lot of other safe, very, very easy, free techniques that you can try before we jump into that.
Yeah, I was going to say, how does somebody know when the psychedelic route would be applicable for them?
I mean, ideally going to see somebody who is familiar with that stuff. So I think that there are lots of great couples and therapists,
not necessarily
intimacy therapists,
not necessarily in relationships, but just generally with stress. Like, how does
someone in general?
Yeah, someone who's they're feeling very stressed. Maybe they've tried a couple of things to de-stress them. Would it make sense for them to maybe experiment with that sort of treatment, or would you recommend, okay, maybe there's a few of the things you haven't tried first before then doing that?
Yeah, I mean, we recommend. I mean, from the nonprofit medical board side that I serve on, and just as a physician, we are taught to always focus on trying the least risky things first. Always. We take the Hippocratic Oath in medicine, which, I think starts with first do no harm and non-maleficence. And these are really important principles of medicine that often get forgotten, unfortunately, and then patients get hurt. And so psychedelic medicines are very powerful, and they're very, when used properly, they're incredible healing. They have incredible healing potential, but when used properly is a critical part of that. And so we recommend, and best practices in the evidence base would recommend, that you should be, if you are struggling with anything that you've been hearing us talk about here, you should go find someone either like me or a therapist who's an expert in your field, in trauma and stress and grief, in whatever it is you might be struggling with, anxiety, depression, and start a relationship with that person where you start exploring all of the risk-free things that you can do to feel better, which can include, technologies like Apollo. It include dozens of different talk therapy techniques, breathing techniques, mindfulness, yoga, exercise. Exercise works better to treat depression than antidepressants, just to put it out there, right? So that's what the evidence says. So when we think about when should somebody start thinking about psychedelic medicines, start thinking about them whenever you want, but try the other stuff first, because that's what psychedelic medicines really help with, is getting you, is augmenting what you bring in. And so if you've done more work up front before you start working with a psychedelic medicine, you're going to get much, much more out of the experience. And they amplify what you bring in. And having a therapist and a guide is an absolute goal recommendation, because the experience with a trained therapist or guide is dramatically more impactful and long lasting than experimenting on your own or with somebody who's untrained.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we need to move on to the next topic, but because the psychedelic aspect was very interesting. Just from my personal understanding, if I have PTSD, then ketamine is more applicable. And if I have current stress or high levels of stress, then it's MDMA. Is that a simplified approach that you would say? Is that sums it up a little bit, what you said prior? Is that how you would use those substances?
Yeah, like after trying like all the basic things.
We're getting to the other things. I'm just saying, like, because you said if it's epigenetically passed on generations, then ketamine might be the way to go. But if it's something from a stress level perspective, MDMA might be the one that lowers your stress level and allows you to be in sync with your body and with your partner. So one is more like it's abuse, and one is more, maybe self-inflicted stress, and that's how you use solutions. Is that how I understood it?
Not exactly, because ketamine is actually the only legal psychedelic that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that MDMA is not only not legal to be used in the clinic right now, but MDMA can't be used safely with most other antidepressant medication.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about that, roughly 50% of people nationwide and probably in much of the Western world are prescribed antidepressant medications. That means that they have to stop taking those antidepressant medications in order to be able to get to a point where they could even start to take MDMA or psilocybin therapy. So ketamine then is actually the only medicine that's a psychedelic other than cannabis that can also be used therapeutically but isn't taught well. Ketamine's the only one that can be used to safely help taper somebody off of a previous antidepressant regimen to get to MDMA or psilocybin therapy. So in general, we actually always recommend that ketamine is the first safest place to start for any person who's seeking a psychedelic experience for healing. Ketamine is the most tested, it's the most well understood, and it's the shortest, simplest experience for people where you can easily get safe access to it. So ketamine is always the number one that we recommend. I would say even when the others become legal, ketamine will still be the number one that we will recommend first, because it's the safest. And it doesn't matter what kind of trauma or stress that you've had. Ketamine, unless you have a direct contraindication to ketamine, ketamine's generally the first best psychedelic place to start.
Now let's talk about the other tools. Now, let's say you have somebody who has high stress levels, and he's asking you for recommendations in terms of supplements. What's some of the supplements that you would recommend a person to improve his stress levels?
So it depends, right? So if somebody has a deficiency of certain nutrients, that's typically what we look for first. So if you're
not getting enough, let's say that's covered. Let's say we have
that's covered.
That's covered. The baselines is covered. You're speaking to optimized people who covered the deficiencies.
Shout out to Bio.
Okay, so in that case, I typically use adaptogenic molecules. My favorites, I can send you links to share with your audience.
Yeah.
My favorites tend to be an adaptogenic mushroom blend. Adaptogenic mushrooms have been used for a long time, but they've become a lot more popular recently. We've been using them in our clinic for years because they improve cognition, memory, resilience, and they do it over, and they decrease inflammation, and they do it over time, which is really great. So you might not notice that you're getting an effect from taking adaptogenic mushrooms in the short term. Some people do, but most people notice it over the course of months, and they notice that they're generally functioning at a higher level months later. So those are the kinds of molecules that we use typically, and they would include like the Paul Stamets 14 or 21 mushroom adaptogenic blend. There's a few other brands that we've used in the past, but Paul Stamets are extremely reliable and really good quality.
What do you think
the
of
other
his,
ones?
What do you think of his? Do you know? Are you familiar with his Stamets 7 supplement?
Yeah, Stamets 7 is great. That's like
Okay.
a good general
I've
version.
tried that.
I like the immune blend. Yeah, I like the immune blend from Stamets, which has more different mushrooms in it, and it also has more immunity illness benefits. But in general, like the Stamets 7 is great. I recommend that or one of the other higher mushroom content ones to nearly all of my patients. The other medicine that I use frequently or supplement is CBDA, which is one that a lot of people don't understand. I'm one of the few clinicians that is trained in cannabis therapy, and I teach a lot about cannabis therapy, particularly how to use non-psychoactive cannabinoids or minimally psychoactive cannabinoids to address inflammation and adaptation resilience in the body. It turns out that raw cannabinoids, so cannabinoids that come from cannabis plants, either hemp or like the kind of cannabis that gets you high, those raw cannabinoids that are not heated are more anti-inflammatory by leaps and bounds than they are after you heat them. So it's like the health benefits of extra virgin olive oil compared to the health benefits of regular old heated olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil has more health benefits. It turns out it's the same with cannabis, but even more so. And so you can buy CBDA, which is the raw extra virgin version of CBD, and it stands for cannabidiolic acid. And you can buy that from a brand that is one of my favorites in particular called Artis Botanicals that we have certified and vetted at the Board of Medicine, which is one of the best CBDA brands that exists in the country, organic farming practices, and very affordable, accessible product. And it's dramatically anti-inflammatory, and it helps with everything from headaches and migraines to allergies to premenstrual symptoms in women and menstrual cramps. It helps with gut irritable bowel. And it just has an amazing powerful cohort of effects. And so and it has great effects over time. I use it for quite a bit in my patients recovering from cancer and folks who are struggling with cancer pain related and fatigue related issues. And then there's, of course, other ones that I use for specific purposes, but I would say the cannabinoids like CBDA and the adaptogenic mushrooms are my go-to favorites.
Now, the one buzzword that everybody's trending right now, although it's been around for a long time, is peptides, obviously. And peptides, do they have room in your toolbox for stress, for mental well-being? How would they replace something? Would you add them on top of something?
I mean, so I think there's certainly room for peptides when they have been tested for certain kinds of indications. Ultimately, what I think most people don't realize is there haven't been good clinical trials on long-term use of most peptides. And so when it comes to my clinical practice when I teach other clinicians about, well, what is the evidence base for what you're doing? If there's evidence for using like a whole plant extract that has those peptides in it or stimulates the production of those peptides in the body, I'm much more likely to use the whole plant extract which might have like hundreds or thousands of years of evidence from indigenous use or other cultures and some Western evidence as well, than to go straight to a peptide if there isn't as much evidence for it. Of course, there are some peptides that are really helpful, but in general, I haven't needed to integrate them into my personal practice. I think that we are starting. The exciting part about it is, and it's still an early time for the peptide field. We're starting to see some really promising results in different illnesses, that are especially chronic illnesses, where people are responding really well to peptides and not having high numbers of side effects or severe side effects. And so I think it's very exciting to see what will come in the peptide field. And I'm a national lecturer at medical training events and accredited training events, and I'm just starting to see more information and evidence about peptides coming up. So it's definitely something to keep an eye out for and exciting for the field.
What about people who are struggling to, first of all, get to sleep? As in, like, when the head hits the pillow, Some people are there just restlessly thinking for an hour before they actually fall asleep. And then what else can help with optimizing the quality of sleep, so maximizing deep and REM sleep?
So there's not a lot of clinically proven tools that can help with staying asleep. That's actually why we developed Apollo, is because Apollo detects it. It can track your sleep and detect when you're about to wake up, and then using AI, it turns on automatically to prevent you from waking up in the middle of the night. And we built that with sleep doctors, at world-renowned sleep doctors and AI experts, to solve that specific problem, because there aren't any technologies that are proven to do that. And then we proved that it can do it. And it can give you 60 more minutes of sleep back a night, which is really exciting. So that is kind of, I would give you a glimpse into the future of AI, and how AI can actually in real time improve our health. We're like, this is one of the things that we're doing in our mission at Apollo, is to solve complex public health problems like getting more deep and REM sleep and unwanted middle of the night wake ups, that we don't have solutions for until now. With respect to falling asleep, there are a lot of things that can help you fall asleep, but some of them have side effects and some of them aren't very comfortable or not fully clinically proven. So I think sticking with the things that are clinically proven, that have a lot of evidence behind them, um, that thing like there's a lot of herbs like valerian root, skullcap, passion flower, and things like that. Magnesium can help you fall asleep more quickly at night. 5-HTP can help you fall asleep more quickly at night. So these are, and then in once you get into the cannabinoid space, one of the most powerful non-psychedelic, non-psychoactive cannabinoids that's really helpful for sleep is cannabinol, CBN. And CBN has just had some big studies in the last few years published around how it's helpful for improving, decreasing time to fall asleep, helping people fall asleep faster, which is really exciting. And then we're starting to see on the non-supplement clinically proven side, technologies like Apollo are helping people fall asleep faster. And there's some other technologies that like vagal nerve stimulators that use electrical stimulation to calm the body. Those can help people fall asleep faster. And then there's the medications like, and other supplements like melatonin helps, but only when used under 1 milligram. Most people overdose melatonin, so you really want to use less than 1 milligram, usually closer to 0.5 milligrams of melatonin, 30 to 90 minutes before bed. Other supplements like, and medications like Ambien, Sonata, like there's these other prescription-based medications. Those are the most clinically proven, but they have the most side effects and they're the most addictive. So Ambien has a lot of side effects. It causes poor performance the next day, grogginess, and has a side effect of sleepwalking and sleep eating and occasionally sleep driving. So not something that we necessarily want to take a risk on. I know somebody who got a DUI from sleep driving on Ambien. So seriously, like these things happen, and he lost his ability to drive. And he was a doctor that was prescribed Ambien. So these things happen. So we try to avoid the prescription stuff, but the good news is that there's, by doing the right supplement cocktail with the right technology solutions, especially if you combine them, we can give you back now in modern sleep medicine. We can give you back 30 to 60 minutes or more of sleep each night if you're a poor sleeper without relying on prescription sleep aids. And that's pretty great. That's like 7 hours more sleep a week.
That's huge. Dave, thank you so much. Before we leave, I have one final question, which we like to ask our guests. I think everybody who is on this podcast at this point in their lives has a daily routine because they tried out so many different things. Some of them stick, some of them came, left, and some of them were just scared to try right now, like me with the whole ketamine this conversation. I'm just not there yet. Can you just, for our listeners and our audience, just share a little bit, given all the exposure that you have and the science and innovation, what's about to come out in the future, what's currently part of your daily routine and what's the idea behind each of those steps?
I mean, I would say I have a newborn at home, so my daily routine is definitely more disrupted than usual. So I'll just put that out there to start.
So no extra 7 hours of sleep.
Yeah. Well, I'm using Apollo every single day, and I'm using the AI every single day, much more religiously than I did before, because every moment of sleep counts. And my wife and I run our own company, and I also see patients. I run a medical practice and a nonprofit, and we don't get any maternity or paternity leave because we run our own businesses. So, we really want to spend time with our baby. So our lives are like really hectic, and it really throws routine off. Like, just to give you an example, like we spend so much time trying to build structure to our lives, and then our babysitter injures herself and is out for the week or two. And we just have to figure out how both of us are going to cancel half of our meetings to watch our son while the other one's working.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like there's no other option. There's no other babysitters available. Like that's just it. So then all the routine goes out the window. But the things that really, really help me, I think, like stay resilient through that and bounce back through that, are just like trying to go to bed around the same time every night. For me, it's like 11, but I try to go to bed around the same time every night. I typically wake up around the same time every morning, around 6 a.m. It creates like what's called circadian structure. And when you have circadian structure, your body knows when it can expect to get more deep and REM sleep, and when it can expect to need energy and be like putting out energy like in the daytime. And so when you have those regular sleep cycles and sleep windows, like my sleep quality is excellent, even though I'm only sleeping sometimes 5 or 6 hours a night. It is like half deep in REM sleep. So my sleep is extremely restorative. And my HRV, even though I'm sleeping less and stressed out a lot of the time, my HRV is like between 70 and 100, even though I'm sleeping much less than I normally would before we had a baby. So I think like those kinds of routines and keeping like prioritizing, scheduling playtime where I'm not working is like absolutely critical. Especially for both me and my wife. Like we have to schedule time where phones go away. There's no calls unless they're emergencies. There's no email unless it's an emergency. Like we just have to turn work off so that we can maintain our recovery and restoration time. And that's really what I think the major part of our routine that prevents burnout. Because that's how you refuel the tank is with your playtime.
Mm-hmm.
And we often like discourage playtime now, right? Like we talk about how like play is just for kids. So just focus on work and work until you die. But like, that's not good. Like that's how we burn out and then can't continue to work the way we want to. If we refill the tank every day or every couple of days, we make sure we're like refilling the tank, then we can sustain tremendous levels of effort for a really, really long time, potentially for our whole lives. Like I have colleagues who are doctors who have great work-life balance, who still see patients and work nearly full time and they're in their 80s and they love it. And you probably know some people in your life like that too, who just continue to work in their old age because they love it and it restores and refills them. And so I think like if you can find that balance around routine and prioritize recovery and play as much as you prioritize your actual work, then you can do pretty tremendous things.
Amazing.
That's all for me. That's it's been very, very interesting actually.
Thank you, Dave. Just for the audience, where can they find more about you and about what you're doing?
So if you want to come find me on socials, I'm at Dr. David Rabin on Instagram and Twitter X. And I also have my personal and professional website is drdave.io. You can find out more about my work, my clinical practice, hear me speak, and find me at different speaking engagements on that website. You can find more about Apollo at apolloneuro.com or Apollo Neuro in the Apple App Store. And then if you want to hear more about my work with psychedelics, I actually have a show on psychedelics called the Psychedelic Report, which is the leading psychedelic news show that talks every week or two about the latest goings on about psychedelic medicines, trauma, and how all of these tools that we're talking about and researching work on the brain and the body. So get the lowdown there on iTunes, Apple Podcast or Spotify. And then I have another show quarterly called Your Brain Explained, which is all about the consciousness and how your brain works, that touches on psychedelics, but also any other topic like AI and other other ways that our brain works and how we design things around how the brain works. So I'd love to hear from you. Please do reach out. And thanks for tuning in.
Dave, thank you so much for your time. Absolute pleasure. I learned a lot of things.
Yeah.
Beyond a lot of topics that I will definitely implement. I think a lot of the audience also heard a lot of things that they need to hear from somebody else. That they have their control. They create the environment. They make themselves believe they can feel safe, and then the body will take over and adjust to what the mind is telling us.
Yeah, and Apollo sounds very, very interesting. I'm keen to give that a try.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have an iPhone, you tried an iPhone, and just hit me up and let me know.
Awesome.
Thank you
so much. Takes about 2 minutes with your eyes closed. That's all you need.
Thanks, Dave.
Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Take care.